Hello, my name is Michael Conley, and I am the Director of Finance and Operations of the North Reading Public Schools. And today is March 10th, 2017. And what I thought I would do today is spend a few minutes talking a little bit about our FY18 school budget revenue offsets and additional revenue sources that the North Reading Public Schools has certainly come to rely on over the last several years that help certainly fund the school budget. So I think everyone is well aware what the operating and general fund budget supports, but I always feel that the community and parents alike always wonder what the additional revenue sources in the form of grants and revolving accounts that the school department receives, what those are and what they're helping to fund. So I thought we would spend a few minutes today talking about those. And first and foremost, I wanted to just quickly look at this chart and certainly give everyone an indication that we have come to rely on certainly about $2.5 million of additional revenue offsets to help make the school budget and deliver the level of resources and services to the North Reading student that we are. A lot is relied on in terms of our other revenue sources. And if you look at this chart going back to fiscal year 2011, we are relying on on average, $2.5 million in additional revenue in the form of grants, federal and state, and revolving accounts. So there are a variety of reasons why these amounts have kind of fluctuated or changed from year to year. In the early years on this chart, we were receiving additional assistance through the form of ARA grants, recovery grants from the federal government during the years of the recession. We then experienced a decline. In fiscal 2014, that was a year we really dipped into all our revolving accounts and any level of reserve that we had to try to make that budget work. So we didn't experience a decline after that. And then in fiscal 2017, the existing year, we actually increased some user fees for the first time in busing, athletics, and extracurricular, and experienced a little bit of an increase to our revenue by increasing some user fees. And then in fiscal 18, it's fair to say we are certainly taking some additional risk with this offset and relying on maybe some less conservative assumptions on the revenue that we're going to bring in. But it's fair to say that we have come to rely heavily on these outside sources, and we're on average looking at about $2.5 million a year on an annual basis. So from the federal and state grant standpoint, this is a chart that breaks down the amount of funding we receive from our grants. Most of these are federal grants, as you can see. The first five, we received five major federal grants, and these are the grant titles and what they're funding. The last item on this list is the Circuit Breaker program, and that is a state-funded program where we are entitled to receive a level of reimbursement for instructional and tuition costs for in-district and out-of-district students. So the state kind of sets a threshold for eligibility, which is essentially 4 times the state average foundation budget pure pupil amount calculated under the Chapter 70 program. So anything above this threshold, which could range anywhere between $41,000 or $42,000 in a given year, in the most recent years, the state will reimburse you. If this program is fully funded, that reimbursement is at as high as 75%, and it could be as low as 60 to 70%, depending on the level of funding the state has in what is being funded in the state budget. So these are the funding sources. When I refer to our federal grants, we have 5 major grants that we rely on an annual basis. North Reading is a community that doesn't qualify for a lot of the other private grants or pothole grants. We just don't meet the criteria to qualify for those grants. So we rely heavily on these 5 grants, which can be referred to as their entitlement grants. They're funds that are due to the district that we're eligible for. We do have to apply and fill out applications on an annual basis. And some of the criteria that could change the amounts of the allotment that we receive could be student enrollment and student demographic data all work to drive the amount the district receives each year. For example, if the amount of low income students that the district has in any given year could impact our allotment, the amount of students eligible for English language learning services could impact our allotments, and most recently, the state's actually calculation of a low income calculation of those students that qualify has impacted our allotment in some of these grants, in particular teacher quality in Title I, that North Reading has seen, and a lot of other municipalities and districts have also seen. So, but these are the 5 major federal grants we rely on. The Early Childhood Grant, $15,000 to help fund a partial preschool paraprofessional. Special Education Program Improvement Grant, a $20,000 annual allotment geared towards special education professional development opportunities. So that's speakers, trainings, conferences that we may send our special education staff to, either speakers we bring in, trainings we run, or conferences we send staff to. Teacher Quality Grant, about a $25,000 allotment that funds teacher professional development opportunities. Again, we could do some trainings, we could send some staff to some conferences, we could help fund the teacher mentor program to provide new staff the ability to have a teacher mentor from a veteran staff. All these things help fund the teacher quality grant. The Title I grant, that's essentially student tutoring services for Title I eligible schools. We have 3 Title I eligible schools: the Hood Elementary School, the E. Ethel Little School, and the middle school. So students at these schools eligible for these services receive direct academic tutoring through the Title I grant. The largest federal grant allotment is the IDA grant. This largest amount we've come to rely on at about $520,000, and that helps fund our special education paraprofessionals and our special education transportation costs, our district transportation costs. That's the largest general fund offset in terms of a federal grant. And then, of course, this circuit breaker program, which we rely heavily on. We've relied heavily on an annual amount of at least $650,000. That does help offset our special education out-of-district costs each year. And that, again, that's a state-funded program through that formula that I spoke of earlier. So in total, about $1.3 million, as you can see, come from these state and federal sources through the federal grants and the state circuit breaker program. So as you know, we're relying on between 2.6 and 2.7 million on an annual basis over these last couple of fiscal years. So about half of that is driven by our federal and state grants. And then our revolving accounts. So I know a lot of times we get questions from parents in terms of what are the revolving accounts that help offset the budget, and what are the funding sources. Well, these essentially are the 6 revolving accounts that we rely on an annual basis. We, of course, have the athletic revolving account that does help fund all of our athletic expenses in terms of coaches, transportation, supplies, ice rental, equipment, game referees and officials, everything that goes into our athletic program. And we do assess a user fee and gate receipts for these programs. So, I think unfortunately, I think North Reading is in a situation where we are, somewhat forced to assess user fees and tuition costs to fund these programs. We certainly, and I know the school committee has spoken to and have set school committee goals on the fact that we would like not to have to do this. But I think it's just a fiscal reality for the community at this point in time. And a lot of other municipalities and school districts are in this same boat as North Reading, and they assess similar user fees and tuitions for these programs. But certainly not something that we would love not to have to do. But certainly the athletic user fee and gate receipts that we collects about $295,000. There's the extracurricular revolving account where we're collecting about $67,000 from a user fee that's assessed to the middle school and high school students, providing them an opportunity to participate in any amount of student clubs of their choosing. The transportation revolving account. So I just wanted to make it clear that we do assess a user fee to parents that are not eligible for free busing to school, to and from school each day. We are required by law to transport students in grades K through 6 who live greater than 2 miles away from their school. And we provide that transportation free of charge. But then we do offer an additional optional, through an optional busing program for families that don't meet that criteria to elect to pay a user fee and receive transportation to and from school. And those would be students in K through 6 who live within 2 miles to their school, and students in between grades 7 and 12. So the amount that we collect on average has been about $275,000, and that helps offset that cost for the optional busing program, those additional buses that we offer through that program. We do have a facility rental revolving account, and as of late, in the FY18 budget, assumes we would collect $65,000 in income through renting out school space, whether it be our library, our auditorium, our classrooms, that we rent out to outside groups. There's a tiered fee structure that we would assess a user fee or rental fee to these outside groups. And the amount of revenue that we come in directly offsets kind of maintenance and facility costs, upkeep, repairs, and supplies in the space that's being rented. So that's what we're able to do. Then these last two, obviously you have the full day kindergarten and preschool program that we offer, and we do charge a tuition for parents and for students participating in the full day kindergarten program as well as the preschool program. The amount of revenue that we do receive for the full day kindergarten is about $455,000. That's the amount we're anticipating on receiving in FY18, and that directly offsets the cost of full day kindergarten teachers and full day kindergarten paraprofessionals in that program. And the same can be said for the preschool. The amount of tuition that we receive is about $140,000 annually, and that revenue directly offsets the cost of the preschool teachers teaching in that program. So we're looking at about an additional $1.3 million in additional revenue from these programs on an annual basis. That's income that we receive and deposit in these accounts, and the revenue directly offsets these expenses that I just went through. So I know it's also always a question from parents often where they know they're being charged a user fee, they know they're being assessed a user fee for a variety of these programs, a busing fee, an athletic user fee, an extracurricular fee, children that are full day kindergarten fee, and they often wonder what is that, what kind of type of revenue does that generate, and how much of that does my user fee and this user fee revenue go into offsetting the actual direct cost of these programs. So that's essentially what this chart is intended to represent. So the FY18 total cost there in that column represents our projected direct cost, our budgeted direct cost of these programs. And then the annual user fee contribution, many of what I went through, you can develop an understanding of what the percent of the annual user fee contribution represents of the total cost of this program, direct cost. So I just spoke about the regular bus transportation contract. We run 10 buses a day to all of our schools, and the cost of running those 10 buses a day for the 180-day school year is $625,775 next year. And the current user fee, which you can see is listed there in the last column, brings in annual revenue of $275,000. So that represents about 44% of the total cost of our transportation contract. And again, I will say we are required, 5 of those buses that we run every day are buses we're required to run to meet the demand of those students eligible for free busing. And then those additional 5 buses are buses we run to meet the demand of parents that have opted to participate in the optional busing program and pay the user fee. So it's about a 50-50 split, and the amount that we're collecting is offsetting just under 50% at 44%. In terms of our athletic costs of our athletic program, that amount of $651,924 represents the total cost of our entire athletic program when you look at all the salaries, coaches, all the expenses, again, transportation, game officials, rental costs, equipment, everything that goes into an athletic program, running an athletic program represents a cost of $651,924 in North Reading next year. The annual user fee contribution User fees and gate receipts flowing into that account is about $295,000. So that represents about 45% of that total cost is generated through the user fee and the gate receipt as well for athletics. The extracurricular activities, these are the student clubs at the middle school and high school. Variety of clubs are offered at the middle school and high school: music, theater, math, etc. The direct cost of the club advisors to coordinate these clubs and work after school in these clubs with the students is $116,713. The user fee of $200, which increased for the first time in several years this current year, fiscal 17, brings in about $67,000, which does represent about 57% of that cost. And then the kindergarten program, I talked a little bit about that and the amount of revenue that we are receiving in the last slide. The direct cost of the teachers and paraprofessionals working in that program in FY18 would be $862,504. So the amount of revenue we're receiving on that annual basis represents about 53% of that cost. I will just note that that amount represents obviously the direct costs of the teachers and the paras working in that program. There are many other indirect costs of kind of coordination and oversight of that program, as well as collection, the cost of the accountants working in my office to collect and receive the tuition, but that amount represents the direct cost of that program. And the revenue is about 53% of that direct cost. On the preschool side, the cost of the teachers and the paraprofessionals, $305,992 next year working in the preschool program. The amount of annual revenue bringing in from the user fee that's assessed for the full day and half day program, which is listed in the last column, represents about 45% of that cost. So I think it's fair to say that our total cost of all these programs that we're assessing fees and tuitions costs for to families in North Reading is a little over $2.5 million. And the amount that we're relying on for the collection of these fees and tuitions is a little over $1.2 million, which in fiscal year 18 would represent about 48% of our total costs, is being offset by the money kind of flowing into these revolving accounts through user fees and tuitions, and in the case of athletics, gate receipts. So when you look at kind of the big picture in fiscal 18, we have an FY18 budget request kind of on the table for school committee consideration at this point. There's still a lot of steps to be done and work to do to finalize the FY18 budget, but we do have a request of $29,984,968. That is a $1.4 million increase, or 5% increase over fiscal 17. And I think it's, as we all know, and as we just talked about, that does not show the true picture of total funds that are working towards fund the school budget. So all of the grants, federal grants and the state circuit breaker program and the revolving account sources that I just talked to in FY18 would fund an additional $2.7 million, a little over $2.7 million, making the total school funds $32,686,968 in fiscal 18. So we certainly rely heavily on these outside revenue sources, grants, and the revolving accounts. And as we all know, and as we've come to even know and appreciate more over these last couple of years, that still doesn't tell the true picture of the level of funding we're receiving to make the North Reading student experience is what it is. We have come to rely heavily on several donations from many support organizations, booster groups, parent organizations that we work with. So the annual average, certainly over the last few years, we've done a really good job calculating these amounts and tracking the amounts of gifts and donations we receive from these organizations that we work with and partner with to bring the level of services to the North Reading student. On average is about $175,000. And then I think through working with the parent organizations and looking at other things that the parent organizations have come to support on an annual basis through in-kind gifts in their own budgets for a variety of activities, whether it be enrichment activities, classroom supplies, awards, ceremonies, and technology, equipment, etc., to their respective schools that they support, would add an additional $75,000 to that. So I think we certainly appreciate the work of the presidents and the treasurers of these organizations to help me collect this data over these last couple of years, certainly been eye-opening for the school committee and the community and the district to see just how much these organizations do. And we couldn't make the North Reading student experience is what it is, and the level of resources and services, if we didn't have that level of support. So as you can see, I hope what this presentation did provide is that it's a lot more than the general fund goes into a school budget. We have those federal grants that we rely on. We have the state circuit breaker program that we rely on. We have all those revolving accounts and through user fees and tuitions that we unfortunately are at a point that we're relying heavily on right now to make the experience of the North Reading student is what it is. And then we have the generous support of many, many parent and booster organizations that provide an array of donations on an annual basis and an annual amount of their budgets to help fund the school enrichment activities and classroom materials and so forth for each teacher. So a lot goes into the equation, and I hope that this brief presentation helped to shed some light on the additional revenue offsets and budget subsidies that we have relied on and that make the FY18 budget request kind of what it is. And we are again at the very early stages of the FY18 budget process. There's a lot of ways to go, and I hope to see you at some upcoming presentations, and I hope this information was helpful to you. And again, my name is Michael Conley. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations of the North Reading Public Schools. Thank you.